The lead singer of the rock band Alice in Chains has been found dead in his Seattle home.
Layne Staley sang like he had nothing left to lose, and by the end, he didn't.
I remember the first time I heard him sing, I was like, man, that guy's cool, you know?
His voice was iconic. His life was tragic. This is the story of a star who burned out from the inside.
But you feel that Layne Staley is in a good place?
I saw him in a dream and it felt like, seeing him there, like maybe he's in a good place.
This is the story of a fragile soul, a God-tier voice, and an addiction that kept asking for more until there was nothing left. This is the story of Layne Staley. Layne Thomas Staley, born Layne Rutherford Staley, entered the world on August 22nd, 1967 in Kirkland, Washington. He was raised in the Seattle suburbs and joined a little kids rhythm band in his hometown when he was just 2 or 3 years old, being the tiniest member of the group. According to lore, at 9 years old, he scribbled in a Dr. Seuss book that he wanted to become a rock star. And by age 12, Layne had moved on to playing drums. Life at home, however, was less harmonious. Layne's parents split up when he was 7, and his father vanished from Layne's life when the boy was only 8 years old. The sudden absence of his dad left a deep scar. He was raised by his mother, Nancy, and a stepfather, Jim Elmer, who tried to provide stability. Religion was a big part of his childhood, but not in a way he appreciated. His family practiced Christian Science, a faith known for eschewing conventional medicine and putting trust in prayer, which is also the same faith Metallica's frontman James Hetfield was raised into, which he later described as making him feel very alienated from society.
My parents were raising me as a Christian scientist, which basically you're not believing in doctors and there's some great aspects to the religion, but for a child it was a little difficult to grasp. It's one of those religions that I think you can understand a little better when you're older and have been to the doctor and understand what it's about, and basically mind over matter. And it was difficult. It was very alienating for me as a child being raised this religion, and how I couldn't attend certain health classes at school. When you're in elementary school, you want to be hanging out with the buddies and doing stuff together, and all of a sudden, they'd get their health books out, and I wasn't supposed to learn about the body because, this is just a shell for your soul and all of this, and you don't need to know about it because you're never going to the doctor, and you don't, God will fix whatever ails you. And so I'd have to get up and leave class, and, whisperings, how come you leave every time? And then I'd have to go into this whole explanation about the religion, and, when you're 7 years old, you don't want to sit there and do that to everybody. And you're on the football team and get exempted from taking your physical and all of this, and it didn't make me feel a part of this earth. Really, it actually really alienated me. Just as silly as it sounds, but it really did.
As an adult, Layne didn't mince words about how he felt regarding that upbringing. He thought organized religion brainwashed people, and that as a child, he couldn't wait to break away from it. In a twist of teenage rebellion, he even legally changed his middle name from Rutherford to Thomas in honor of Mötley Crüe's drummer Tommy Lee. By his mid-teens, Layne Staley was fully immersed in the 1980s rock scene. He switched from drums to vocals, realizing that front and center suited him better. In the mid-80s, he fronted a glam metal band called Sleaze, which evolved into a group cheekily named Alice in Chains, not to be confused with the later spelling.
Which used kind of the same name, but it was more like Guns N' Roses, Alice in Chains instead of Alice in Chains.
The guys would literally dress in drag and blast out speed metal covers of Slayer and Armored Saint.
Trying to start a band that would play like kind of satanic speed metal, but dress in drag, you know what I mean? So it was like they were trying to get like a soft word and a hard word. So Alice in Chains, and kind of like a play on that.
The guy had zero shame and 100% commitment.
Layne Staley was, one of the best friends I ever had. He had a real mischievous sense of humor, high intelligence.
Glam rock Layne was a far cry from the brooding grunge icon he'd later become, but it showed his dedication to music and performance. Everything started to change when, at a party in Seattle, fate came knocking in the form of a homeless guitarist named Jerry Cantrell. Jerry walked into this raucous party and couldn't help but notice the skinny dude at the center of attention, Layne Staley.
I met Layne at a house party, I think, in, West Seattle, I believe. And I'd never met him before, but I'd seen his band. And I remember the first time I heard him sing, I was like, man, that guy's cool, That guy's got a great voice. I would love to be in a band with that guy.
The two got to talking and hit it off. Layne discovered Jerry had no place to crash, so he did something that shows a bit of his character. He invited Jerry to crash with him at the dingy rehearsal space where Layne was squatting.
He met me at that party and we hit it off, and he's like, man, Nick was telling me about your situation, man. If you got nowhere to stay, you can come stay with me. I can probably even get you a job. And he did. So I basically moved in with him at the Music Bank, which was underneath the Ballard Bridge.
This wasn't some cushy apartment. It was basically a glorified storeroom that smelled like piss and had ratty gear everywhere. But it was home for Layne, and now for Jerry too.
He worked at a place called the Music Bank, which was like a rehearsal hall, but basically, we just kind of crashed there. He worked there, worked a shift of letting bands in and out of their rooms, like when they were doing gigs or whatever, and then lock everything up and make sure that everything's secure.
He really pushed me to become more than I was, and I'm always grateful for that.
In that crummy little practice room, Layne and Jerry decided to form a new band together, combining Layne's vocals with Jerry's guitar riffs.
We lived there until we started the band, pretty much, and that was 87. December of '87, we played our first show.
They pulled in bassist Mike Starr and drummer Sean Kinney to round out the lineup by 1987, and that's how Alice in Chains was born. In the late 1980s, Seattle was on the edge of something big. Clubs were packed with young bands chasing a sound they couldn't quite define.
It was an interesting time. There was so much great music. Music was already changing in the late '80s. There was a heavier, more aggressive element to it, not just in our town, but just across the globe. And things were changing a little bit, and it felt like the change was even bigger. And there just seemed to be an inordinate amount of people the same age that were receptive and liked all of this stuff, and then had the crazy idea, like, man, I'd like to do that too. That sounds cool, and let's get a band together. And so you put an ad in the back of the music paper, or you ask your buddies about hey, do you know a good bass player or whatever, but there was you're absolutely correct. I mean, the Seattle and the the whole kind of area from, from Olympia to Aberdeen to where I was in Spanaway and all the way over to Bellevue and up around the U District. And I mean, it was just littered with bands, We were all like 2-3 years apart in age,
Alice in Chains started pulling a crowd early, not because of radio play, but because their shows delivered. Layne Staley's voice reached the back wall of every room they played. Their energy was primitive, visceral, and brutal. Their early shows were a mess, but in the best way possible, loud, sweaty, and packed. Then they recorded the Treehouse tapes, a rough demo recorded with limited gear and a mission to get heard. They paid for it themselves, handed out copies, and the scene started really paying attention. Eventually, it landed on some desks at Columbia Records, who were already sniffing around Seattle for the next big thing. The label executives heard the tape and their eyes immediately turned into dollar signs. And that's how Alice in Chains signed with Columbia in 1989. Facelift came out in August 1990, and for a while, nothing happened. Sales were slow and no one was really talking about it. Then, months later, MTV made a surprising move. They started airing the video for Man in the Box on repeat. The track wasn't built to be cute. It was dark, angry, and dripping with dread, but it worked and pushed Facelift up the charts, then straight into gold and platinum territory. Next thing they knew, they were opening for Van Halen.
We were the first band to kind of break MTV open
to have a gold record.
To have a gold record. Yeah, we had the first big bout of success, and then it just, but
Alice in Chains built a sound that felt like a sickness you couldn't shake. It was heavy enough to rattle bones, but soaked in grief and dread. Metal fans felt it in their chest. Alternative rock kids felt it in their stomach. While the Seattle scene was still waking up, Alice in Chains had already carved out their territory. Nirvana had the punk sneer, Pearl Jam had the earnest arena rock vibes, Soundgarden had the Zeppelin worship, but Alice in Chains brought darkness. Their songs often felt trapped, like they were written in the middle of a hopeless night. Thing is, even as their popularity was rising, Layne was already deep into heroin. What may have started as a casual habit had turned into a constant. At first, nobody panicked. It was the 90s. A lot of people were using back then. But for Layne, experimenting was long over. This was a full-blown addiction. That feeling came through clearly in Dirt, released in 1992. Wood gave the band its first real breakthrough. Layne's voice sounded like it came from somewhere between the grave and the gutter. The song landed on the single's soundtrack and pushed the rest of the album.
Layne Staley, the voice, man, is such a unique voice and an incredible performance on this record. The lyrics are meaningful and dark, which is something I love because I'm both meaningful and dark.
Junkhead was a straight-up ode to heroin. Sickman was a descent into chaos. Down in a Hole was pure despair wrapped in haunting harmonies. And Rooster, written by Cantrell about his father's Vietnam trauma, gave Layne the perfect vehicle to howl someone else's pain as if it were his own.
I never thought there was anything better than Nevermind. Is that the album? I never thought there was anything better than the first Pearl Jam album. I never thought there was anything better than Soundgarden, Super Unknown. Holy fuck. I give all those albums fucking props. But this motherfucker here, Alice in Chains, Dirt, it's worth every fucking dime.
The album went quadruple platinum, but it didn't feel like winning. It felt like watching someone bleed out in slow motion. Track by track proof that Layne was getting lost in his addiction and barely surviving it. And people loved the honesty. The album sold millions. Critics called it bold, dark, unforgettable. But fans weren't just hearing great songs, they were hearing a man coming undone in real time, and maybe they related. Layne wasn't pretending when he sang about drugs and suffering. He was already deep in it. And yet, the band only got bigger. In 1994, they released Jar of Flies, an acoustic EP that wasn't even supposed to be an EP. It was recorded in a rush, just a casual jam session, but what came out of it was a 7-track masterpiece of beauty and melancholy. Songs like Nutshell and No Excuses showed a softer side of the band without losing an ounce of emotional weight. Layne sounded like a man singing from the bottom of a well, and people felt it. Jar of Flies made history by debuting at #1 on the Billboard 200, the first EP in chart history to do so.
When you're inside, that's sort of a wild ride, which we were on, and it's, you know, everything is going by so fast, and you know, you pick up some bad habits sometimes to deal with things, myself included, and you know, that's down the road with enough use ends up killing you, you know, or sapping the soul out of you. And
rock stardom always comes with a price tag. For Layne, it cost more than fame could ever pay back. Alice in Chains were on fire. Massive tours, chart-topping records, platinum everything. But Layne was dying, slowly, painfully, and in plain sight. Eventually, he started bouncing in and out of rehab, with little success. And here's the sick part, nobody could help him. Not the band, not the people closest to him. Least of all, the label executives. His voice was gold. His pain was marketable. Yes, his addiction was inconvenient, but not enough to stop the show.
No, I mean, I'd fucking go over to his place and fucking, he'd be playing me shit, he'd be writing all the time, you know, and I would too, and he'd play me stuff and I'd play him stuff.
The label didn't want him to get clean. They wanted more tours, more records, and more money. Fans screamed, journalists smiled, and behind it all was a guy rotting from the inside out.
Kurt Cobain was the lead singer of the group Nirvana. Their albums were bestsellers, their songs filled with images of despair and violence. One lyric, "The sun is gone, but I have a light, the day is done, but I'm having fun." And then this morning, his body found at home, another casualty of success. Here's ABC's Tom Foreman.
Then, in April 1994, Kurt Cobain died. And for a brief moment, that news shook Layne to his core. He didn't talk about it much publicly, but those around him said it hit hard. Layne had been close with Kurt. They came up in the same clubs, same studios, same broken city. Kurt's death was like staring into a mirror that cracked, and for a second, Layne stopped using. People around him saw the color return to his skin. He smiled more. He even started talking about the future again. But that hope faded fast. In 1994, the band had a huge tour lined up, opening for Metallica, big festival stages, even a slot at Woodstock. But just days before it all began, they called it off. No warning, no real explanation. Officially, it was health-related, but everyone knew the truth. Layne had relapsed, and this time, it was worse. After Alice in Chains bailed on their high-profile tour opening for Metallica, rumors swirled. People claimed Layne was dying of AIDS, or that the band had broken up, or that he'd already OD'd.
Everyone I was getting interviewed by, and the other guys that were searching for a snazzy way to write an insult, and disguise it. And I was just tired of it. Nobody wanted to know about the music. They wanted to know, are you getting fucked up? Are you gay? Are you dying of AIDS? I'm usually the last to hear that I'm dying of AIDS or whatever it is.
The truth was simple and sad. He was in the grip of heroin and couldn't function reliably as a touring musician, so the band went on hiatus. During this downtime, Layne embarked on a side project as a kind of therapy, or at least a change of scenery. He teamed up with Pearl Jam's guitarist Mike McCready, Screaming Trees drummer Barrett Martin, and bassist John Baker Saunders to form a supergroup called Mad Season.
We just we kicked around the idea. The name actually came from, like we were saying earlier, when we were in Surrey doing our first album, Pearl Jam, I had heard some of the people that worked at the studios say that they were referring to it as the Mad Season because that's when the mushrooms, hallucinogenic mushrooms, had come up. And that name always kind of stuck with me. And it also kind of has to do with my years of abuse of drugs and alcohol. So subsequently, Baker and I came back to Seattle and just called up Layne. Baker had been a huge fan of Layne's, and I've known Layne for about 10 years. And I wanted to play with Barrett too, so I called up Layne one day and called up Barrett, and we got together and rehearsed, and things just started happening. So we started playing shows around Seattle.
And what I remember about Layne is that everybody wanted to get into those shows, for free or on a VIP pass or whatever. And every band was allocated a certain number of guest lists for each show. And Layne would not give his list to VIP people. He would go out in front of the venue and he'd find the kids that couldn't afford a ticket. Or, the shows were all sold out. They couldn't get in. And Layne would put those kids on his guest list.
They recorded an album called Above in 1995, and it produced a haunting radio hit, River of Deceit. Layne's performances on that record are eerie and beautiful. You can hear him wrestling with his demons in songs like Wake Up. Above went gold and gave Staley another taste of success outside of Alice in Chains.
I was more satisfied with the Mad Season record than any other recordings I'd done.
Layne did the record he did with Mad Season and McCready. I was a little pissed about that myself. It's like, I don't know, if you spend so much time together in a non-sexual way, it's like somebody fucking your girlfriend, basically, you know what I mean? You've got this relationship with them, you feel a little betrayed, but as you grow a little bit and maybe a couple of days pass and you think about it a little bit, that can only be healthy, and I think that they've dealt with that issue, and that's a good thing to see.
Mike McCready later said that getting involved in the project was his way of throwing a rope to his friends. He'd gotten sober, and maybe, just maybe, this was how he could help them do the same.
I think it's the position that I'm in, potentially, I'm going to be asked about these things, and this is why this band came up. It's because I got clean. So I think I need to talk about it for that sake. I certainly don't want to preach to anybody about getting, people have to figure out for themselves what they want to do. I had hit a very hard low at one time, and this is kind of after I got through that, this is the fruit of that, of the years of destroying myself, and now finally being clean and realizing that I can actually do things now.
But even the Mad Season project wasn't enough to pull Layne out of his nosedive.
It just happened very quickly and organically, and then we did 3 or 5 shows in the video, and then it all fell apart,
Alice in Chains regrouped in late 1995 to record their self-titled album, sometimes called Tripod, because of the 3-legged dog on the cover. Astonishingly, despite Layne being in bad shape, the album turned out great and debuted at #1.
As far as I'm concerned, we'll make another record, and if that one goes well, we'll make another one after that.
But The band couldn't even properly tour to support the record because of his condition. They only played a handful of shows in 1996. One of those was an iconic MTV Unplugged performance where Layne sat in a chair and poured what was left of himself into the music.
A friend of mine first played Alice in Chains Unplugged, MTV Unplugged, and you could see in the DVD, like, you know, his eyes are all bloodshot, like he probably didn't get a lot of sleep, was probably hitting something, you know, not too good, and but it didn't matter. His voice was just amazing, his tone was amazing, his pitch was dead on. Like, the dude was a freak. He was a complete freak of nature, and yeah, what an amazing talent.
It was a great, one of those, it was a magical show, I remember that. It was just one of those nights that everybody was on, and it was really cool, and the crowd was great. I was at a theater somewhere in New York, and anyway, candles everywhere, and I think Layne said, "I love you all, I want to take, or I want to hug you all, but I'm not gonna." And then we walked off the stage.
We were there for 7 hours.
After that, Layne disappeared, and everyone knew why. Then came the final blow. In October, his fiancée and longtime partner Demry Parrott died from drug-related complications. She was only 27. Demry was everything to Layne. They'd been through the chaos together, both trying to get clean and both losing the fight. When she died, whatever was left of his will to survive went with her. He moved into a secured condo in Seattle, shut the blinds, stopped answering the phone. No more tours, no more press, no more anything. Layne Staley became a shut-in. Layne had stopped pretending rehab was even an option. He told people those programs weren't for him and didn't believe there could be a happy ending to his story. After that, the rumors got darker. Friends who managed to see him were horrified. Years of heroin had shredded his body. His arms were a mess of scars and open wounds. His teeth were mostly gone, either rotted out or fallen out. Then out of nowhere, in 1998, Layne reappeared to record 2 new Alice in Chains tracks for a box set, Get Born Again and Died. Producer Dave Jordan was stunned. Layne looked like he hadn't walked in months, was pale as drywall, and had almost no teeth. But when the tape rolled, that voice came roaring out, damaged but full of something primordial and brutal. He sounded like a man clawing his way out of the grave to say one last thing. And then the inevitable happened. On April 4th, 2002, Mike Starr went to visit Layne to celebrate his own birthday with him. But Layne was in such a bad shape that he looked even worse than usual. Mike wanted to call for help, but Layne refused, and they ended up arguing until Mike left. Mike would later confess he carried that moment with him for the rest of his life, plagued by guilt.
I was with Layne the day, it was my birthday, he died the day after my birthday. And I was with him all that day on my birthday, trying to keep him alive. And I even asked him if I could call 911, you know, and he said if I did, he would never talk to me again. And of course, I didn't know he was going to die, or I would have called 911 anyways. Of course, I would much rather have had him alive and him not talking to me than to have lost such a great human being. So,
and a dear friend.
A dear friend. Just a great person. What a great person he was.
And then no one heard from Layne for 2 weeks, but at first no one panicked because that kind of silence had become routine. Then the money stopped moving. On April 19th, Layne's accountants noticed his bank account hadn't been touched in 2 weeks. For someone who still had rent and bills, that wasn't right. They called Alice in Chains' manager, Susan Silver. She called Layne's mother, Nancy. Nancy rushed to Layne's apartment with his stepfather, calling 911 on the way. When they arrived, the warning signs were impossible to ignore. There was piled up mail and a distressed cat crying from behind the door. When the police arrived and broke down the door, they found Layne on the couch, his body already decomposing. He'd been dead for 2 weeks.
The lead singer of the rock band Alice in Chains has been found dead in his Seattle home. The partially decomposed body of 34-year-old Layne Staley was discovered Friday night. Authorities have not yet released the cause of death.
The medical examiner later declared that Layne died of a speedball, heroin and cocaine mixed together. The same cocktail that had taken down River Phoenix and John Belushi had claimed another. Layne Staley's story is tragic, yes, but it's also mythic because Layne, for all his pain and isolation, has given us something real, something sacred even. The grunge scene lost one of its brightest or perhaps darkest stars, yet his voice never faded away. Instead, it carved itself into the hearts of millions of people. Seattle honored him officially by declaring August 22nd Layne Staley Day. But the real tribute is quieter. It's the kids still finding dirt for the first time. It's the tattooed fans whispering the lyrics to Nutshell under their breath. It's every broken soul who found comfort in the sound of someone else translating their pain into music.
I thought after 2 years, well, you know, everybody will move on. It's been 21 years, and I hear from new people every day.
Layne Staley's life is a warning, yes, a brutal one. He had everything: money, fame, love, and still couldn't outrun the grip of addiction. He was proof that no amount of talent or success can shield you from the war inside your own skin. But we don't just remember Layne for the way he died. We remember him for the way he lived and for the way he sang. For the way he made misery beautiful and turned trauma into something transcendent. He was a skinny kid with haunted eyes and a god-tier voice. He flew higher than most ever will, then fell harder than anyone should, but he gave us everything he had until there was nothing left. That's why when he sang, it felt like a confession and a true connection.
But you feel that Layne Staley is in a good place?
I saw him in a dream and it felt like, you know, seeing him there, yeah, that like maybe he's in a good place, but I also felt like, is that, and I don't know if I say it in the blog or not, is that a projection? Is that what I want to see? Or is that, you know, or is that what's really going on?